Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for standing by and welcome to Visual BI's webinar. Our topic for today is Azure Advanced Analytics for SAP customers, where we will be discussing and watching a live demonstration on how SAP customers can leverage Microsoft Azure and Power BI to provide advanced analytics. During the presentation, all participants will be in listen-only mode. If you have a question during the presentation, please submit it via the Q&A portion of the screen. Simply type your question into the box and click the send button. Our presenter will address questions at the end of the presentation, time permitting. If you do not hear an answer to your question today, don't worry. We will deliver answers to you individually after the webinar. The webinar is being recorded and a link to the replay will be sent to you via email. Presenting today is Clint Vallandigham. Clint is an experienced information technology manager, supervisor, team lead, an individual contributor with expertise in the areas of data warehousing, business intelligence, analytics, and application development using the Microsoft platform. I will now turn the presentation over to the presenter.
Thank you, Gladys. I appreciate that introduction. All right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session. It's my pleasure to be speaking with each of you today, and I'm going to be presenting this live demonstration leveraging Azure's data services and Power BI to deliver advanced analytics from your SAP environment. So just a little bit about myself. I'm Clint Vallandigham, and I'm with the Microsoft Services team here at Visual BI Solutions. As Gladys said, my background is in Microsoft development technologies, and really data has really been my passion in that. So data warehousing, business intelligence, analytics, insights, all those type of things have really been my focus over the last many years. So utilizing the cloud services in Azure really has been just a natural next step in the progression for each of these disciplines. Just a little bit of housekeeping. We are going to make this webinar available on our website as well, visualbi.com. We have a past webinars library, so feel free, check that out. This webinar will be there and others that we've given. And as Gladys mentioned, submit your questions as you have them. I'm going to make some time at the end to address them, and I'll be following up with every question. If I can't get to it to the webinar, I'll follow up offline later. All right, so here's our legal disclaimer. Let's take a look at that real quick. All right, so moving on to our agenda. Today, I'm going to begin with an overview of the architecture that we followed while delivering this product. And I'm going to give some details for each of the layers defined in that architecture. I'm going to give a brief background of our data source that we used for the deliverables for this product. And then finally, I'm going to jump into the live demonstration of all the technology that we're using. All right, so just a little bit about Visual BI. We are a company that focuses on consulting services, software products, analytics solutions, and training. So really anything that falls under the business intelligence solutions, whether that's planning, support, services, and so on. Here's a list of our customers. We have a large customer base. So we have offerings across many different technology stacks. And although we do specialize in SAP solutions, we have expertise in many areas, including Microsoft Azure Data Services, as this webinar is going to demonstrate. Our product offerings extend these technologies. VBI View is a one-stop shop for all your BI delivery platforms. Value Driver Tree can help drive your analysis to the next level with planning and simulations. And VBX enhances your existing investment in SAP Lumira. As seen on this slide, 70% of our revenue is driven from non-visualization projects. Visual BI is more than just a visualization company. And also, I'd like to point out there at the bottom corner, we've recently achieved gold partner status with Microsoft. This demonstrates our expertise as a company and our commitment to this platform. With that, I'm going to be jumping in to the main part of our presentation. All right, so this graphic does represent the architecture we followed for this project. It is similar to traditional data warehousing solutions, but by utilizing the cloud services in Azure, specifically PaaS or Platform as a Service offerings, we've developed a solution that can dynamically scale from small departmental level data marts to enterprise big data solutions. This diagram depicts data flow from the bottom up. So that's where I'm going to start, right at the bottom of this diagram with our source systems. This represents all the various data sources that can be brought into your reporting and analytics solution. Typically your line of business applications. This would feed your data warehouse. So in our case, for this webinar, for the demonstration that I'm going to be performing, we're using SAP BW on HANA. It's good to note that the sources here are really only limited by the connectors available in your Azure Data Factory. And currently there's over 70 data source connectors available. So many different sources are available to come into this type of architecture. Over to the side, the integration layer. I'm going to talk about that next. So this is this layer is responsible for moving the data from layer to layer. Sometimes ETL. In our case, really, it's ELT, extract, load, and transform. But we are going to facilitate this through the use of Azure's Data Factory. And we'll be using this throughout our solution. Also depicted here are the logic apps. This is good to point out. Logic apps can help package and simplify certain types of integration activities. It utilizes workflows to do that. Moving up in our architecture, the transformation layer. This is facilitated through Azure's data lake. The data lake is the data is put into the data lake. It's staged or what is called ingested into the data lake store. We also use data lake analytics. Data lake analytics help transform or enhance the data that we're bringing into our architecture. Moving up to the next level, this is the data warehousing layer. And we're going to utilize Azure's SQL data warehouse for this. We've built an OLAP data structure here. It's going to be represented by fact and dimension tables, and they're going to be organized in a star schema. Sitting on top of the data warehouse layer is our semantic layer. This facilitates data modeling and enhancements, and we're going to accomplish this through the use of Azure's analysis services. We've configured analysis services to use an in-memory tabular model. That will help us support very responsive reporting and analysis. Finally, on the very top of our diagram is our reporting layer. This is going to represent any of the tools that we utilize to generate analytics and insights. Today, I'm going to be showcasing Microsoft's PowerBI to create dashboards and advanced visualizations. All right, so I'm going to just talk quickly about each of these layers before moving on to our live demonstration. So first, let's talk about the integration layer. So the data factory is what we're using for our integration layer. And it's good to point, this is a completely cloud-based data integration service. That means that all the work that I do in here will be done through the Azure Portal. I don't have to have any kind of tools downloaded to my local laptop or workstation. The data factory orchestrates and automates the ETL or ELT processes defined in this architecture. So orchestration, it's responsible for the order in which these things run and how they run, and automates, we're able to schedule these things. So several components make up our data factory. Pipelines, these are used to group our activities. Activities themselves, so these are things that execute on our data, such as a data copy, or maybe executing a data lake analytics uSQL script. Activities are performed on data sets. So data sets define the input and output for our activities. And then finally, link services. So these are defined against the data sets to tell them what their source is. So this is where our connection string type information is. And as I mentioned, all this can be scheduled. So that's what we call triggering. So triggers are used to schedule these pipelines. Scheduling can be on the clock, and it can also be on demand. So quickly, before I move on, let's talk about logic apps just very briefly. This is, like I mentioned, it's predefined workflows, and they can help quickly build solutions that integrate applications, data, systems, and services across your enterprise. It simplifies how we design and create scalable solutions. things around system integration, enterprise application integration, B2B type communication, all those type of things are facilitated inside these logic apps. They can work all in the cloud, just on-prem, or a combination of both. So it's pretty flexible. All right, so let's move up to the next layer. This is our transformation layers. Let's talk a little bit about the data lake store. So what is the data lake store? It's an enterprise-wide hyperscale repository, and it's made for big data analytic workloads. So what does that mean? Enterprise class. So it has certain capabilities that would qualify it to be enterprise class. Things like security, manageability, scalability, reliability, and availability. Hyperscale repository. That means it's powerful enough for even the largest companies, but it is easily scalable. So like all of our Azure offerings, things scale from very small to very large. The data lake store enables us to capture data of any size, any type, and stage it in one place. It is designed for big data, and it's built on top of a Hadoop architecture. So it can work with your existing HD Insight applications. One thing to note here, and you'll see this when I get into the live demo, is we are using generation 1 of the data lake store, and generation 2 is out in an early preview, and it touts some really big changes. One of the biggest things I was reading is a change to the storage platform that the data lake store is built on, where it's built on Azure's blob storage. So some exciting things going on there. The next piece is data lake analytics. So this is where we transform our data or enhance it. So data lake analytics, what is that? That is an on-demand analytics job service. It is directly integrated with the data lake. It allows you to dynamically provision resources. And you can do analytics on terabytes or even up to petabytes of data using this technology. It works slightly different than some of the other tools we've seen. You only pay for the processing power you use, not the storage space. So Microsoft represents that in what they call an Azure Data Lake Analytics Unit, or an AU. Data Lake Analytics introduced USQL. This is a query language that extends our familiar, simple, and declarative nature of T-SQL, but it adds the expressive power of C#. So I'm going to be demonstrating some USQL procedures and show how these two things work together. It makes really powerful programming language. Data Lake Analytics is specifically designed for analytic workloads, and it's tuned for performance. One other thing I'll mention here is that many of our data science applications that are very popular right now are built on top of this technology. All right, so moving up in our architecture to our data warehouse layer. So here we're utilizing Azure's SQL Data Warehouse, and it's going to support an OLAP structure that we have defined. So what is the Azure SQL Data Warehouse? It's cloud-based enterprise data warehouse, and it leverages something called massively parallel processing, or MPP. MPP is data distributed over 60 computing nodes, and we have the ability to define the distribution strategy per table on that. So very powerful. You can quickly run very complex queries across massive amounts of data in this technology. The data is stored in relational tables, but with a columnar storage. What that means is that the tables are really tuned for analytic workloads versus a more traditional transactional workload. Working with the SQL Server Data Warehouse, you use SQL Server Management Studio. So if you have DBAs and data developers that are already familiar with this is going to be a really easy transition for them. And so this is tuned for analytic and ad hoc type workloads. You can direct these workloads at this layer directly of our architecture, but I will warn that there is technical understanding required. So if a data developer is going to work with this, they need to understand certain things about a data warehouse structure. Things like a join strategy, how to group data correctly, performing aggregations, making sure that they have the cardinality set right. We want to make sure that anyone pulling data from our solution is getting the correct answer. And so with that said, I want to talk about the semantic layer. So this sits on top of the data warehouse, and it protects against the risk that I was just mentioning. So the semantic layer, we're going to organize our data into familiar terms like vendor, product, sales, things like that, rather than fact and dimension. So like I said earlier, this is going to help us when everyone uses this. Maybe your power users, less technical users are going to be using that. It helps them to get to one version of the truth. We're going to have a validated semantic model sitting at the middle of this, and it's going to enable that type of self-service and ad hoc reporting throughout your organization. And it's not going to create data silos. One point to hit. Azure Analysis Services provides performance that scales. So this is another PaaS offering, or platform as a service, and it easily scales up to what you need. So you can start with smaller memory requirements, and you can scale that up, and you can also scale this out to multiple instances of AS. The models themselves run in memory, so very much tuned for performance. Analysis Services has an X velocity engine that they've named VertiPack. VertiPack is specifically optimized for these analytic workloads as well. So again, everything about Analysis Services is tuned for this type of reporting. So tabular models themselves can run in memory, or you can use direct query. So they offer the ability to not just pin everything to memory, but to query maybe your data warehouse or other sources directly if you need that more real-time access to data. So you do take a performance hit here, but you still have those gains with the semantic layer. So your relationships are defined, familiar terms, all those things still stay in place. Currently, Azure only supports tabular models. So that's important to remember. If you have an analysis services background, you know that tabular models are a relatively new construct. Multi-dimensional models have been around much longer. So if you're building a new strategy, launching analysis services, think about that. If you're on-prem and you're selecting multi-dimensional, that could limit you later if you're thinking of moving to Azure, moving it to the cloud. One very important part here is that analysis services allows you to predefine many things. So our measures, our calculated columns, and our calculated tables are all predefined and pre-calculated inside of our model. These are physically stored in the model themselves. So those pre-calculated measures, our aggregates that we're performing, sums, year-to-date totals, things like that, are all stored in the memory and very quickly accessible. You can create and store hierarchies in analysis services. So a really great example is date. So a lot of people want to be able to roll up days. I want to be able to roll up the day to the month to the quarter, and the quarters to the year. This can be predefined, and then anyone consuming our model gets to use that. Azure Analysis Services supports role-based security, and that's supported through Azure's Active Directory. So it is very much an enterprise level security model inside of this. Role-based security can be at the model level, and then you can also get down to the row level security. It does take a little bit of knowledge and know-how to do that. So I've talked about the measures, calculated columns, and calculated tables, and all that. That all is made possible through Azure Analysis Services support of the DAX expression language. So DAX is a very rich language offering pre-built functions and calculations for many things. Averages, rolling averages, sums, many date functions, and the list goes on. That is our semantic layer. Let's talk about the very last layer of our architecture. So this is our reporting layer. And this is the layer where end users and analysts are going to interact with our data. The reporting tools included in this layer would communicate directly with our semantic layer in the way we have defined this architecture. As mentioned, in this slide, any of the reporting tools chosen would need to be robust, they need to be enterprise grade, and they need to provide an extensive tool set for analysis to be included. I'm going to be highlighting Power BI today with our demo. So just real quickly about Power BI, it's a collection of software services, applications, and connectors. And this all works together, and it creates a very visually immersive and interactive insights. There'll be 3 tools that I highlight when it comes to Power BI. Power BI's desktop, this is where you author and publish your reports. The Power BI service, this is a SaaS offering, software as a service offering from Microsoft, and it is where we will collaborate and share our reports. And then there's Power BI apps, and so these apps can be downloaded on your mobile device, so it allows access to our dashboards and our reports from mobile services. All right, so lastly, before moving on to the live demonstration, this data flow diagram, it depicts how we implemented the architecture that I've been talking about. So this is meant to read from left to right. So starting at the far left is our data source. So this is our SAP BW on HANA data source that I've mentioned. The data from this environment is extracted or ingested into our data lake store. It goes into an ingest folder structure that's built into our data lake. All this movement is facilitated by our data factory. So the data factory pipelines are moving this data. So we're going to enhance the data. So after we've ingested it, we're going to use Data Lakes Analytics and use a use-SQL store procedure to conform and to cleanse our data. And the result of that operation is going to be placed in our prepare folder and also in our Data Lake store. And then finally, we'll use another Data Lake Analytics use-SQL procedure to transform this data. We're going to transform it out of the SAP structures and into dimension and fact structures. And this helps us easily move that data out of our data lake store and into our data warehouse. So once in the data warehouse, we've built a few SQL Server views on top of these tables, and that just helps us get that data ready for the next layer, which is our semantic layer or analysis services. Those views just do some simple things like helping to rename some columns to make them more legible, things that the semantic layer is going to provide. On the analysis services portion, we have built an in-memory tabular model, as I mentioned earlier. And then finally, we're going to sit Power BI on top of that. And this is where we're going to provide our visualizations. All right. So I have a series of slides here that talk through all the points that I'm going to be going through today with the live demo. So if you do get your hands on the slide deck later, you'll have that. But I'm going to leave this slide deck and move over to our live environment now. So before jumping into Azure, just want to give a little bit of quick background about the data that we've chosen. So we have taken some public data. The data site on iwas.gov website has a lot of data available. We chose a specific data set. It's around sales data, liquor sales in this case. It seemed to lend itself really nicely to what we're trying to accomplish with this kind of demonstration. A lot of people can understand, sales data, there's stores, there's vendors, there's products, all these things lend themselves very nicely to a demo and to some visualizations, things of that nature. So we've got this was our design that we did. So I mentioned earlier an OLAP design, fact table surrounded by dimensions, so star schema. So in the middle of this is our sales table, our dimensions, and of course we've got a date dimension that we've built. And then I've got just a couple screenshots here, just to show there's nothing up our sleeves. We downloaded this data and did put it into our SAP BW on HANA device. So the first query just shows this data has been loaded into HANA. We ran a query in HANA and extracted out a first few of the records, first 200 records. The data can be modeled in a BEX query using the underlying info provider. So this shows that it is a BW environment that this is sitting in. And lastly, this data can be modeled in Eclipse from our SAP BW environment sitting on HANA. So just a little background from the SAP perspective, showing that this is where we put this data, this is where we sourced it from as we're pulling it into our Azure environment. All right, so let's move right into Azure. So it's going to be in my browser. I already have several tabs open here. My hope is that I can just walk through each of these just like I would on a day-to-day basis. So Azure, I went to portal.azure.com. It's automatically logged me in using Azure's Active Directory. So I'm logged in here with my Visual BI account. All the security and all that's been applied. If you haven't seen this before, your dashboard and all this is configurable. Comes out of the box with some welcome help, some quick starts, some things like that. So I've got a dashboard here in the center that helps me just quickly jump to certain resources that I use more often. This will slide out, and this lets me mark certain services as my favorites. So allows me to jump right to those services and pull out resources from those. I went ahead, for the purpose of this demo, all the data services I've marked as favorite for this so that I can quickly jump to each one of them. So without further ado, let's start with our integration layer. This is our Azure Data Factory. So I'm going to jump to Data Factories, and we do have several data factories created out here, both version 1 and version 2. So this demonstration is running out of version 1 of the data factory. That was, as we were writing this at the time, version 2 was still in a preview mode, but there's a lot of great things in version 2, a lot of great enhancements. I'm going to show how we built our pieces and parts of version for this demo in version 1 first. I'll jump over at the end real quick though, and still show you what version 2 looks like. I want to at least highlight a few of the features out of that. So, all right, so jumping in, and you can move these things around. So I had that hidden when we first came in. I'm going to hide it again just to maximize the real estate that we can see here. And I'll be doing that a lot as I move through these different tools in the Azure portal. Anytime you click on one of your tools, it comes up with a little resource window here. It shows you various pieces of information, how you're set up, things like that. And then, of course, all the different actions I can take. So the first thing I like to demonstrate is what we've built with our data factory for moving this data in. Oh, good, it's being pretty responsive. So I talked earlier about the data factory and the pieces that make it up: link services, data sets, pipelines. We've got an integration runtime set up. I'll talk about that here. And then, of course, these things are triggered and scheduled. So when I click on that, we have a lot of link services set up. Our very first one is our SAP BW on HANA link service. We have link services set up for our data lake analytics, our data warehouse. We have some other SAP environments that we've set up. So definitely not limited to BW on HANA here. We have there's many connectors available for connecting to an ECC environment or connecting to a standard BW or those type of things. So all those are possible. When I click on any one of these things, what it's going to show me here is a series of JSON code. If you haven't seen this before, it's just attributes and values. So this is what Azure is going to use to consume to understand how to make that connection. When I flip over to version 2 of the data factory, one of the things they've enhanced is they've put a lot of user interface on top of this to help. So you're not just in here typing JSON code as much. You can use that user interface to help generate this, but still behind the scenes, still this JSON code. So it is important many times to understand that code and to understand that this is what lives underneath inside of all these services. All right, so link services are attached to data sets. So very quickly, when I talk about our data sets, we have to have one defined for every in and out of our architecture. So starting with coming out of SAP, going into our data lake, into the ingest folder, out of that ingest folder into the prepare folder, from there to the transform folder, and finally to our data warehouse. So if I scroll down just very quickly, SAP BW data set. This is our first data set defined. This uses that connection to our SAP BW on HANA environment and just defines that general data set. moving from BW into our data lake, we've separated that into several tables. So the sales table, our fact table, is one of the main ones. So this data set represents that first movement, going into the ingest folder in the data lake. And inside of here, we've defined the structure of that table. So the columns that are defined and their data types. We move from ingest to prepare. So see, I have another one for the sales table. This is the prepare data set. Again, this data set's going to get a little smaller. So when we ingest that data in, this is part of that ELT process. So I've extracted it and I just load it into the ingest folder. So every single column is loaded. But now I start enhancing that. So this data set's going to be smaller. It's only the columns that we need for our visualizations later. Then there's a transform. So this is when we're starting to move this more into our fact and dimension structure inside of our data lake. So still the sales table. And then finally, it comes out of the data lake store, out of our transform folder, and goes into our data warehouse. So this data set defines that last movement. So we can see here what the table is going to be named as it goes into our data warehouse. All right, very quickly, those data sets are involved in pipelines. So pipelines are the topmost structure in our data factory. See, I have a pipeline here for liquor sales. It's going to define many activities or actions inside of there. So our very first activity that you can see here is a copy activity. It's going to run sequentially. So it's going to take that data out of BW and put it into our ingest folder. We've defined a source and a sink. So a source and a destination, sink being our destination. Both the source and the sink have input, an input data set and an output data set. That's how this is coming together. Excuse me. So one important thing to notice here is that I'm writing a query from that source. I'm selecting the data out of this BW source. And if I scroll over just a little bit, you can kind of see some of what we're doing. We're not just querying the entire data set, we are filtering it. So we're taking just the most current date range out of it based on some flags that we're passing around the start and end date of this job. So I am getting a delta set of information for this, just today's records. So that moves on. There's several actions defined in this pipeline. So that first one, as it moves through each of our layers in our data flow, we're going to have an action defined here. I'll show the next one just real quick because it is different. It's not just a copy action. This action is actually using our data lake analytics and using a USQL stored procedure. So the stored procedure is called prepare liquor sales. And so as the data comes in from the ingest folder, it's going to be ran through this USQL stored procedure, and then it'll be output into the prepare folder from there. So from ingest to prepare, it's going to go through USQL. I'll show that in just a second. When I jump out of the data factory, when I move over to the data lake and data lake analytics, I'll demonstrate what that USQL stored procedure looks like. All right, so while I'm here, it's good to note that we have this integration runtime set up. So that is important. Integration runtime is how Azure communicates from Azure's cloud into your on-prem. So our SAP BW on HANA environment in this case, this is what facilitates that communication. Okay, you've always got breadcrumbs to walk back through. So if I come back, I'm going to come back to my first level here. So I was in author and deploy. There's a couple other handy tools inside of here. There's a diagram tool. So this shows our entire setup that we've defined in here. And so just a good way to be able to look at it, so we can see that SAP BW data set is one of the first most things. And these pipelines are interacting with that and transforming it into, moving it to other data sets. So here's where it makes its way to the data warehouse. And all of the pipelines and data sets are represented here. So it is a lot to consume, but it does give you a nice graphical representation of what's happening. monitor and manage. So we talked about triggering these things and being able to control that. So each of my pipelines here are scheduled. They're scheduled to run on a timely basis every day. You see here, they've been doing pretty well, running every single day. So just a little real estate. If I click on one of these, it's going to open up some details about it here. A little hard to read, but the first one in my list here is my liquor sales pipeline. You can see here that it's running every day. It's been green. It would turn red if there's any failure and give me some information about that. In this window, I get quite a bit of information about the last run, what came in, what went out, how long it took, all those types of things. If for some reason I need to trigger this again and on demand, I have this little tool right here in the activity window, and it allows me to rerun a single pipeline, or I can rerun this pipeline with any dependencies that are upstream from it. So I click on that. You'll see it starts spinning here. It starts spinning there. So this pipeline is running now. It usually takes no more than a couple minutes to run. So from our data set side, most of our data sets are pretty small. This liquor sales is our largest with almost 3 million records. So and it takes about 2 to 3 minutes to run. So pretty efficient. You can sit here and refresh this window and watch it. If I do, I'll refresh it once. I'm not going to make us wait the entire time. But it's already finished. If I click back on it to get that information, shows all that. If it would have failed, I'd get a red X. If it was still running, it's got a little hash symbol here that shows that pipeline is currently being executed. Okay. So let's jump back over. I said that I would talk about version 2 of the data factory very quickly. So let me jump over to that, show you what that looks like. So a little different here. Not as many. All those things that we saw in version 1 are gone, and that's because when I click on this, it opens up an entire new tab of all those type of things for the data factory. This is a much richer environment. We've got some wizards right here to help us to create a pipeline, to copy data, do several things. There's videos out here that help get you started on using this data factory. I click this. This is like my author tool that I had in version 1. Shows my pipelines and data sets. My link services are defined down here in connections. So one of the cool things about this is, I've got this interface to do it. So I don't have to write JSON code directly here. If I come in here and select a new one, I talked right at the first of the presentation about we're only limited by the data sources. Well, here's a great list of our data sources. Lots and lots of things to choose from. Get down here towards the bottom, we've got various SAP environments. If I click on one of those, it opens up a window and walks me right through creating that. What runtime am I going to use to talk to my on-prem server? What's the server's name? The system number, the client number, connection information. All those things. You can even test your connection from this. Once that connection is built, it'll show up here. You can edit it. And like I mentioned, so here's my data warehouse connection. I click on the code button. Should look familiar. I can see our JSON code that's sitting behind that. All right. So I think that wraps up our integration layer. It's one of our largest layers. So let's keep moving. Let's move up to the transformation layer. So I'm going to come all the way back to my home screen here. Transformation layer is our data lake. So if I flip out my favorites here, data lake storage generation 1. Let's go take a look. I've got a couple resources out here. So for this demo, use this one. And it's going to pop up and give you some information about how much you're using, how much you're paying, paid a nickel for the storage that we're using right now. So we're on a pay-as-you-go type plan with what I'm showing here. If I click over to the Data Explorer, so the folders that I talked about earlier: ingest, prepare, and transform. This is the important folder. So I'm going to split that. I'm going to drill all the way in here. So I'm going to ingest. We've got our SAP BW source, the fact data, the liquor sales data, this sales fact table. That's what I'd like to show first. So that's the table's name. And again, I talked about delta processing. So we're splitting it out by year, by month, and finally by day. So there's the 7th. If I click on the 7th, I'll see here that we have one file. It's a tab separated file that was created through our pipeline. From this tool, I can click on that and it'll open up a preview, so I can even get down and see the data that was loaded. From that screenshot I had in SAP, this should look pretty familiar. Data coming straight out. Right. So that's a high-level overview of the actual storage itself in the data lake. Let's look at data lake analytics. I talked about that earlier. So it's another resource. So here's our data lake analytics resource. If I click on that, very similar. I'm going to get my resource view up here. I'll go over to the data explorer on it. So it gives me an overview of the data lake. So these two tools, like I mentioned earlier, are very tightly integrated. So what I'm wanting to show here, though, is not the data lake store, but I want to show the data lake analytics database. So there's a master database that sits out here, and then inside of that master database is a folder for procedures. So this is where we've chosen to store our uSQL store procedures. Earlier, when I opened that pipeline, showed you the activity. There was a uSQL activity. It was calling this procedure, prepare_liquor sales. So there is the code right there. This is our uSQL code that we were talking about. Looks very familiar to standard T-SQL, create procedure, those type of things. But we were declaring a variable, but right off I can see something here that looks more like C#, a string class with a concat method, where I'm concatenating my month, day, and year onto that. Declaring those variables. I'm working with those variables, some keywords here, like this variable, I'm extracting certain columns from one variable into the other. And then here's another very powerful method inside of this uSQL. So this extractors class is what it allows us to extract that data and put it back into the data lake in a tab separated format. And there's also comma separated and other methods defined there. So this is that mesh between T-SQL and C#. Scroll down just a little bit more. I've got my outputters where I'm actually taking that and moving it to. So this is the prepare. This is what's taking it from ingest to prepare. So I'm outputting that data as TSV. So this is the syntax that's responsible for that. Again, everything here is stored in the cloud in Azure services. You write these procedures here, you can run and test them here. So that's a quick overview of the transformation layer. But before I leave, there's some, I talked about some data science type applications. I'd like to just real quickly jump through a Databricks application that we have. So these type of a Databricks application would exist somewhat above data lake analytics, more for your data science type things. But we had all this data out here in the data lake that we had stored from this demo. So why not use it? So we created a Databricks application. If I launch the workspace, it's going to open up kind of like the Data Factory does in a separate tab, separate set of tools. So very quickly, this we imported data from our data lake store, and we used a machine learning algorithm on it. So it was the ALS algorithm in machine learning. What we're after here is to be able to rank our data using that. So what we were after is to be able to produce a rating scale around product and stores. So there's going to be a lot of information here. I am not going to try to go into this. I don't have the time. But it's just to demonstrate that this is possible. You set all this up, and then as I get down to the very bottom, it's going to be the output of what happens when you run this Databricks workbook. So it creates for me this set of recommendations with ratings. So by running this machine learning algorithm on it, I can create what products are doing well and what may do well in the future based on the output of this algorithm. So something like that, you could give it to your marketing department. Say in the springtime, this store does really well with these products. Maybe we need to launch a campaign. So anyway, I wanted to just highlight there that by having your data in the data lake, things like this are very possible. All right, so moving on to our data warehouse layer. So I'm going to be jumping out of the Azure Portal now, jumping into SQL Management Studio. So I have, I'm already connected to our data warehouse, and I'm already connected to analysis services here through SQL Server Management Studio. I did want to quickly show that, here's the tables that we have. I said we set some SQL Server views on top of those. So product, vendor, store, and liquor sales. Our dimension tables aren't really large, but our sales table is almost 3 million records. It's a pretty good size. Here's one of the views itself. So just kind of demonstrates, we've got more friendly names for these things coming out. So that's pretty standard SQL. Before I leave this, one more thing that's important to show here is we are in a SQL Server data warehouse environment. So it looks a little different with the icon. When I'm in that and I'm creating my tables, it's created basically the same way, but an important distinction down here towards the bottom, this distribution method. So this is where I said we could help define how the massively parallel processing engine works on those 60 computation nodes. So round robin is the default. That means it evenly distributes the load of this table across those 60 work nodes. So it's a great place to start. You still get a lot of performance increase, but we should really strive for a hash algorithm. If you have a surrogate key, something that uniquely defines the records in the table, that'd be a great candidate for that. And that would help instruct that distribution engine to do a better job when distributing them. Your queries would be even more efficient. So larger your tables get, the more important something like that would be. Semantic layer, so moving up to analysis services. See here, I can connect to my analysis services environment from Management Studio, and I have I can do the administrative type task from this tool, but I cannot author. Authoring is going to be done in Visual Studio. So I can see my connections, I can see my tables that are out there. I can process tables. I can look and get some details around that. So I clicked on that vendor table. I can see that there's been 209 rows processed earlier this morning. So it gives me some good reports. You saw here earlier, my vendor count was 209, so that's great. Things are matching. I can manage my roles and things like that from this tool as well. So I'm gonna click over to this virtual machine. I have Visual Studio 2017 and SQL Server data tools installed on this virtual machine. I have created a analysis services tabular model project here. And go over to, this is a great way to view it. This is the modeling view. So looks similar to what I showed you in the Word document earlier about what we designed, but the distinction here is that this is built into the tool. So these relationships you're seeing here are enforced inside of this tool. So I've got my fact table surrounded by dimensions. When you have this type of, when you have this SQL Server data tool, this type of project, you get the Tabular Model Explorer. So this is very powerful to let you know what's in there, my data sources I'm connected to, the measures that I've built, the relationships I've defined, of course, the tables that are pulled in. So very quickly, I've created some measures off my fact table here. You'll see that they're up here at the top. This is our DAX expressions I was talking about. These can get really, really complex. So sometimes they're hard to read in this little window. There's a little ellipsis you can click on to pull that out. This little DAX editor is really handy for writing those. You get some context help as you're writing your DAX expressions. It'll help validate them. If you have a syntax problem, it'll do the little red underline under what's wrong. So it really helps walk you through creating some pretty powerful expressions in here. And again, analysis services will pre-calculate and store these expressions into the memory, into the tabular model. From this tool, this is a desktop tool, Visual Studio. You need to deploy it. So you set up a few things with the project. So I've set up a link to my Azure Analysis Services instance. And you can name it and do a couple other things. I've named the database as it's going to sit. So we saw that earlier, AS_liquor sales, the name of my analysis services database. Important option here is the processing option. It's set to default by default, which is fine if you have a pretty small model, but as these grow to more enterprise class models, you may not want to process it every time you deploy, especially if processing takes several hours. So it's good to note here that you have some options around that. Maybe you just want to deploy the metadata, use Management Studio to process it later. So that's analysis services. Lastly, Power BI. So I have a couple Power BI projects out here. So this is the Power BI desktop. I have two different Power BI desktop reports that I've built. One based on analysis services and one based on the data warehouse. So I did want to show the difference. So here I'm showing what it can do connected to analysis services. We can see here the tables that were defined in our analysis services model. All the visualizations that come out of the box are here. Everything on the screen will work together. So say I come in here and I'm responsible for a particular vendor, maybe the Jim Beam brands. I can click on that and all the other visualizations will jump to. So everything is now filtered to that. Click on it again, everything goes back. So everything is set, one data set behind the scenes, everything's working together. So very, very powerful of that and very configurable. So if I come here and say, the stacked bar chart doesn't really work, I can easily flip it. No, I don't want that. Maybe a pie chart. No, a donut chart. That I think that looks best here. So this represents, kind of high-level KPIs that you can do. This more detailed view jumps into some of the other things that are available. Getting down to detail level of the data, even in a report. Let's jump over to the other version quickly. So very similar look and feel. The only difference here is that I'm connected to the data warehouse. So I have bypassed the semantic layer. And so what did that mean? So I've lost some of my naming. If I click on the relationships, you'll see here that I had to build this. So I pulled in the tables from the data warehouse and I set up the relationships. So I had to understand that the sales and the product are linked by this product key. So very important. If you make a mistake here, you can obviously get the wrong answer. So it takes, that's what I was saying, it takes some technical know-how to do this. Also, all those measures that I showed in analysis services, you'd be responsible for building those. But Power BI does have the ability, it has a DAX engine, just like analysis services. So you can build those here, but you have to have that know-how as well. So you have to rebuild them for each project. Jumping back out. So from the desktop tool, I would publish to the service. So out in the service, it should look exactly the same. So we can see here this dashboard, everything looks the same, still works the same. I can filter. Excuse me. I can filter by just particular things. All the data just jumps to. All that look and feel works the same. I am right now. I'm able to interact with this report, but not able to edit it like I was in the desktop. Based on your security, it is possible to do some of that, but again, it's just something to keep in mind. You can edit. You get pretty rich editing from the service, but it's important to remember to keep those in sync. So if you're editing here, make sure you download that and put it back to your desktop if you're keeping a desktop version as well. One last thing I'd like to show on this is, so I'm in a report here, not necessarily, it's a report called the sales dashboard, but any of these visualizations that you see, there's a little pin icon. I'm going to take that and pin it to a dashboard, create a brand new dashboard. Call it the webinar demo, I'm going to pin it. And what this popped up and said, hey, do you want to create a phone view? So that's pretty interesting. Let's talk about that a little bit. So here's my new dashboard. So really the dashboard is the entry point into this tool. It's what you're meant to see first. And then you click on anything that's pinned and it'll take you back down to that report. But like it said here, I'm in a web view. It's pretty cool to show that there's also a phone view. So I can tailor that specifically for a mobile device. So this type of KPI is really good for mobile, but if I have like a plot with a lot of data on it, it may be a little much. So I can turn things on and off based on that. All that would be consumed. That's how the mobile device, if you had the app, like the Android or iPhone app installed, that's what you would see as the mobile view. All right, so that concludes all of my demo portion. Again, I don't have a whole lot of time, but I'm going to run through these as quickly as I can. Anything that I can't get to, I'm going to get to, we'll get to afterwards, and we'll send our responses out. So, are the connectors available in Azure Data Factory? Yeah, the Azure's Data Factory, as I showed there in version 2, defines around 70 or so different connectors that are available. So that those are specifically what's available if I'm going to be using Data Factory to pull data into this model. There's some specific questions about SAP, things like that. I will defer to my colleagues that are a little more versed in some of that, but we'll definitely get to those. Is this solution with a full or delta load? So this is a delta load solution, and I think typically that should be what we strive for. So what we were doing in this solution is from that pipeline, you saw I was contacting our SAP BW source and supplying a where clause to SAP BW where these dates are between this particular range. It gave me a very specific set of data back, and that was making it to my folders in the data lake. Why would I define my business data model in the semantic layer instead of HANA? So, I've had a few questions like that around the semantic layer. What's it giving us? And I hope I addressed many of those, but it really does make it more user friendly and more responsive. There's some very particular reasons, but there's a lot of use cases around why data should come out of certain systems. This typically go back to the typical data warehousing case. I've got an enterprise data warehouse that's pulling in many sets of data. So sometimes it makes sense. I'll grab my ERP data out of SAP, but I've also got maybe marketing data, vendor data, all these different sources. I can place that into my data warehouse, and it allows me to create reports that combine all of that. So all the pieces of this architecture would work together for that. Our data lake would be our landing spot for all that data. Data lake analytics helps us cleanse that data and get it more conformed to our enterprise standards. Moving that into the data warehouse, that's where that type of combined reporting can exist. So I've done things in the data warehouse to be able to link things together. So I have maybe vendor data coming from the vendor, as well as this sales data coming from SAP. Having some common keys that let me pull that together in the data warehouse, and then making that easy for a power user or our business users in our semantic layer. So just trying to empower our business to be able to do all those different things is what's important and why this architecture exists. All right, well, I have several more questions. I'm not going to be able to get to all of them through this. I need to wrap up, but we'll go through each and every one of these and get your questions addressed and back to you as soon as we can. I meant to a couple little things I'd like to show off here. We have some upcoming webinars, so not next week, but the week after, and then the week after that, we have 2 more webinars just in the month of August. So come out and visit us, visualbi.com. Check out what we've got. We always have these type of things going on. So, and we have, like I mentioned earlier, in our past webinar session, you can go back and look at it. If you've missed one, maybe you can come back and take a look at that. Right. Well, with all that said, I really appreciate everyone's time, taking a little bit of time out of their morning to sit in with us, and was really excited to be able to show you what Azure Data Services can accomplish. Thank you very much.